Hello. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody, is this on? Yeah. Remind everybody to please turn off your cell phones. Thanks, Skip. For 22 years, growth management has been the predominant term we have heard whenever land use decisions are being made. It sounds self-explanatory, but the disagreements on the interpretation of its policies and the way to plan for growth management are legendary in our county. Today, we're going to learn about why the Growth Management Act was enacted in the first place and how it is working for us here. We're going to hear about UGAs and LAMERIDs and impact fees and all those wonderful terms. To help you follow the discussion, the League of Women Voters has prepared a cheat sheet. On it are the goals of the GMA, some term definitions, they're on your table, and a timeline of what has happened with the GMA in Whatcom County. Those sheets are on your table. The test is at the February meeting. Our panel today is comprised of local people who are dealing with the various aspects of the law. Jean McMelius is a professor of environmental studies at Western Washington University, partner in Noseman LLP, and the president of FutureWise Whatcom. Mayor Gary Jensen is the mayor of the growing city of Ferndale. And Jay Irwin of Irwin Land Use Consultants also teaches planning and zoning classes at the Bellingham Technical College. Our moderator is Kayleen Cottingham, and she's going to start with the history behind the enactment of the Growth Management Act. Ms. Cottingham has a long history of working with the issues around growth management. Her first job out of college, more than 30 years ago, was as a county land use specialist with the Oregon Department of Forestry, helping to implement Oregon's newly adopted Land Use Act. She moved on to being the land use coordinator for a large timber company in Washington, Idaho, and Montana. Since most of her work, you'll appreciate this, ended up in court, in Congress, or in the legislature, she decided to enhance her skills with a law degree from the University of Puget Sound. Most of her employment has involved natural resource management, but Ms. Cottingham was one of the key advisors to Governor Booth Gardner during the negotiations on the Washington's Growth Management Act, and she helped draft the legislative language. Over her career, Ms. Cottingham has worked for 3 governors and numerous other elected officials. Governor Gregoire appointed her director of the Recreation and Conservation Office in 2007, and our City Club member and former Senator Harriet Spinell is on her governing board. She has seen both sides of this issue, as for a while she hung out her shingle and represented land use clients. Please join me in welcoming our panelists and Kayleen Cottingham.
Thank you. Can you hear me, or do I need to hold it? Thank you for that introduction, Jane, and it's nice to be here today. Just so you don't think I'm a Olympia bureaucrat coming up to tell you how things are up here, just wanted to let you know that my great-grandfather homesteaded over on Fairhaven Hill to start the West Coast first silkworm factory, and I guess they found out that the silkworms don't eat the leaves we have here, so they didn't make it and moved down to Seattle. But I thought I would tell you that I do have a Whatcom County connection. So my role here today is to not be an expert and to not be an advocate. My role here today is to set the stage so you understand some of the politics and the things that were happening at the time of the Growth Management Act. As you heard, I was staff for Governor Booth Gardner when the Growth Management Act was first envisioned, when it was negotiated, and when it was enacted. I did have a role in appointing the first series of hearings board member and training them on a wide variety of things. And since that point in time, most of my career has been in implementing or interacting with the Growth Management Act in some way. And currently my agency provides millions of dollars to local and state agencies that in a way implement the Growth Management Act through parks and trails and open space and farmland preservation. So I touch it in many ways. So to set the stage, in the mid to late 1980s, the state of Washington experienced some incredible growth, a huge growth spurt. Local governments could not adequately deal with the growth at the time. We had some serious problems caused by that growth, a lot of traffic congestion, sprawl, loss of farmland, loss of habitat, insufficient school capacity was a big driver, and we had the conversion of some of our important natural resources lands. And in particular, local governments did not have the funding that was necessary to deal with the public facilities or the public services that were needed for this growth. They did not have funding for roads, for schools, for fire stations, all of that stuff. So the only sources of funding at the time were local taxes, bonds, and grants from state federal agencies. Early in the 1980s, the legislature had prohibited the use of impact fees, so there was nothing directly related to growth or potential growth that local governments could use to get out ahead of this growth. So the chaos created in the late 80s was really at the heart of our quality of life, our communities, and we were losing certain aspects of our natural environment at a pretty rapid rate. And we didn't have the funding for schools, for roads, for fire stations, those kinds of stuff. There was also no consistency between state, local, or federal plans. The local communities were authorizing subdivisions in areas that couldn't access freeways, for example, because there were no on-ramps, and no plans to make sure that they were connected in any way, shape, or form. There was no requirements to make sure that the development being approved had adequate supplies of water to serve those communities, or that the sewer systems had the capacity. So there was no coordination between various levels of government, and there was no coordination between adjacent local governments. Also at the same time, there was no requirements that state agencies comply with local requirements. So basically, it was chaos. But all that changed in 1989 and started in motion a series of events that led to the passage of the first Growth Management Act in 1990 and a subsequent act in 1991. So you can see we've had 22 years of the Growth Management Act. And let me just set the stage a little bit about the numbers, and then I'll talk a little bit about the politics. Since the Growth Management Act was enacted in 1990, 1.9 million people have moved to Washington. At a state level, our growth rate is 39%, and in Whatcom County alone, you grew from 128,000 to 202,000. You had a whopping 58% growth rate during that time period. So, huge amount of growth happening here and statewide. So here are the political players back in 1990 that were very involved. First of all, my boss, the governor at the time, he was critical in that he established a commission that was called the Growth Strategies Commission. And he played a pivotal role in appointing the members to that, in staffing it, and then in having his staff and agencies negotiate the bill. So he was very active in that. Besides the governor, there were two key political players. One was the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and his name was Joe King, and he was probably the biggest driver behind this. He came from Vancouver at the time, and they were having huge growth issues as the bedroom community for Portland. The other major leader was the Republican majority leader, Jeanette Hayner. She was from Walla Walla. And she was very instrumental. You can imagine her caucus was extremely split between very rural communities and suburban communities that were taking in a lot of the growth. So what happened is, so I'll talk about them a little bit. I'll also talk about a group of women legislators. During this time, state of Washington became a leader in electing women to public office. And during this time, there was a huge number of women elected. And at some point in time, it became kind of interesting. All of the committee chairmen in the House of Representatives were women that touched on growth management. And they became known as the Steel Magnolias. And I'll talk a little bit about who they are and where they are now, because that's kind of interesting as well. Plus, there was a million interest groups out there, from the environmental community to the builders, to the agricultural communities. Everyone and their dog had a thing or two to say about that. So, let's go to Joe King first. He was the Speaker of the House, and he initiated this process because the local governments kept coming to him for money. They kept coming for money to deal with the consequences of sprawl and growth. They needed money for roads, for fire stations, for schools in particular. And he found that growth, although people argue that it pays for itself over time, although there's some question about that, the funding always comes in late. It never comes in advance when you need it to build schools and the like. So he also at the time was watching the election of House members, and he noted that there were several interesting races where incumbents were being booted out over issues related to growth. Through the loss, people who were being booted out for the loss of green space and over congestion and lack of public facilities. So he was very nervous that the political balance would change unless they came to grips with growth issues. Also, the Republican leader at the time, I think she saw the same thing. The suburban communities were being faced with growth. They were, everybody was taking a look at where the power was at the time. So she also took this on, and she held her caucus together through the whole thing. So in 1989, the Speaker inserted a proviso in the budget to create the Growth Strategies Commission. The governor vetoed this because the governor thought that he actually wanted to be more involved in how it was structured. So he appointed the members, and the chair of the commission was a gentleman named Dick Ford. And Dick chaired that commission. He's a notable Seattle land use attorney. And he is still very active in issues today. He's the chair of the State Transportation Commission, so still very active. And the governor asked the Growth Strategies Commission to talk to everyone who had a thing or two to say about growth, sprawl, public services. He asked them to look at how other states were doing it and to come up with some recommendations for the state of Washington. He asked them to do that by 1991. The Speaker of the House thought he wanted to do it earlier. He wanted to have something in place in time for the 1990 elections. So what ended up happening is although the report wasn't finalized until 1991, the parts of it were implemented early. So a bill was introduced in 1990 with parts of the recommendations from the Growth Strategies Commission, and it was split into 6 equal pieces. And each one was handed out to one of these aforementioned women chairs of House committees. So here's who they were, and you'll recognize some of these folks. Representative Maria Cantwell was in charge of all the economic development issues, and she later went on to be one of our U.S. senators. Representative Mary Margaret Haugen, she was in charge of the issues related to local government, and she today is the chair of the Senate Transportation Commission and from Skagit County, just south of here. Representative Jennifer Belcher, she was in charge of all the issues related to natural resources, and she went on later to be elected to the state's lands commissioner, where she served for 2 terms. Representative Ruth Fisher was given all the transportation issues. She subsequently became the chair of the House Transportation Commission. Representative Nancy Rust, she was in charge of all the environmental issues, and she served for many terms until she retired. And as a little footnote, she was my Girl Scout leader when I was in junior high school. So, and then Representative Bussy Nutley was given all the housing issues, and she subsequently became the director of the Department of Community Development. So all of these women were very powerful in the House of Representatives. They all played a very key role, and it was, I think, for one of the first issues in the legislature where women played a very decisive role on issues that were not traditionally women's issues. So kind of set the stage for the future, and something I like to point out. One of the main reasons that in 1990 the bill passed is the Speaker of the House threatened that nothing would happen with funding for transportation unless growth management passed. And as today, as then, funding for our roads and our freeways was very important. So it was some major leverage to get this passed. So the first bill did pass in 1990, and but instantly some people complained that there was no consequences. There were no teeth in the bill. There was nothing that would force people to comply, no problem resolutions. And so in the summer of 1990, the environmental community mounted a campaign for an initiative to impose a much stronger Growth Management Act. It was modeled after the Oregon plan, and they got enough signatures to put it on the ballot for the November 1990 election. And the leaders of the legislature at the time, once it got enough signatures to be on the ballot, they said they were opposed to the initiative, and if it failed, they promised to come back in 1991 and enact the teeth for the Growth Management Act. This was a commitment they even put in writing, and it was a bipartisan commitment. So the election comes around, and it was quite intense over this issue, and almost everyone was opposed to the initiative except for the environmental community. All the cities, counties, developers, virtually everybody lined up against it. And it was defeated at the ballot. And some legislators at that time wondered whether they still needed to live up to their commitment, but they did. They lived up to their commitment. The Growth Strategies Commission released their final report, and elements related to the consequences, how to deal with penalties, how to deal with disputes, appeals, those kinds of things, were rolled into a bill in 1991, and it was negotiated. It passed. $20 million or so was appropriated to implement it. About $14 million of that was pass-through money for local governments for grants. And that's where we are today. There were some huge incentives for local governments that weren't mandated to plan to opt in, and so there was funding to do that. So with that as kind of the political background, I thought I would mention what the key intents of the act are. I always looked at this as Efficiency in Government Act. It was aimed at making sure that the expenditure of public funds were done in a deliberative and strategic way, to plan where our investments and expenditure of tax money was, to not have it be willy-nilly, to not allow sprawl to dictate how much investments we make, where we put our schools, to not lose the opportunities to place our schools and our roads in the right places rather than scrambling to find places to put them after the fact. Sprawl is hugely inefficient for public services. So this was an act I think was aimed at efficiency. The other thing that was kind of important was the bipartisan nature of the compromise. You don't often see that. You didn't see it then. You don't often see it now, of the bipartisan nature on policy disputes. So I think that that is a very important legacy from the Growth Management Act. So before I move to the panel, I just thought I would tell you that what I think are the main elements of the act that passed. The first one is concurrency, and that is making sure that the public facilities are in place in time to deal with the growth that is expected to come. The second part is the urban growth boundaries, to constrain the growth into the areas where you're willing to make those public investments. The third one is the conservation of agricultural, forest, and mineral lands, a key mainstay of our state's economy. The fourth one is the protection of critical areas, whether it's riparian or wetlands, those things that make sure that the critters that we rely on, either the iconic salmon or hunting and fishing, those things still have resources to survive. And the issue of impact fees, so that the planned development pays for the services that it generates. So that's a little bit on the history and the politics of the Growth Management Act. And now I'm going to turn to the panel members. I'm going to ask each one of them to spend about 3 minutes giving a little bit on their background on how their experience with the Growth Management Act. So I'll start with you, Jean. There, I'm just talking to him. It's on. All right, now it's on. No.
There. Well, thank you very much. My name's Jean Melius, and my general experience is that I've been a land use lawyer for more than 25 years, and I teach land use law and related topics up at Western in the Environmental Studies Department. Now, my Whatcom County specific experience started when I served on the Whatcom County Planning Commission for 3 years, from 2008 through 2010, and was the chair of the Planning Commission in 2009 and 2010. 2009, my first year as chair, was a huge year for the Planning Commission. Now, you have to understand that this county has been fighting the Growth Management Act tooth and nail for most of the past 20 years. And in 2009, 2 of the fights that it lost came home to roost on the Planning Commission. The 2 big issues that we dealt with that year were first, oversized urban growth areas, and second, rural planning. Now, I'm going to focus on rural planning because the urban growth area issue is more part of Mayor Jensen's experience with the GMA. I'm sure he'll be talking about that. Rural planning. The root of this issue is that Whatcom County has never complied with a 1997 state law, part of the Growth Management Act, that says that development in rural areas must be limited and contained in order to protect agricultural lands and in order to focus growth in cities. So the Planning Commission held hearings on this, and oh boy, those were some hearings. We had folks coming in yellow T-shirts. We had land grab signs all over the county. We had sheriffs at some of those Planning Commission hearings because I received threats and members of county staff received threats. My friend John Lessow here is another veteran of those hearings, and I'm sure he remembers them as well as I do. We did our best to comply with the Growth Management Act, and we sent our recommendation to the County Council. But that 2009 County Council didn't have time to consider our recommendation, and the 2010 County Council included some folks that were, at that time at least, pretty openly hostile to the Growth Management Act. So that new council essentially threw out the Planning Commission recommendation and started over. A year and a half later, the County Council adopted a substantially revised rural plan. Now, what you may not know, because this is pretty recent news, is that most of the parts of the rural plan that the County Council changed during that year and a half were just found to violate the Growth Management Act in a decision that came out on January 9th. And that takes me back to my own role. At the end of 2010, my second year as chair, 4 members of the County Council voted not to reappoint me to the Planning Commission. So 2010 was my last year on the Planning Commission. As is so often the case, though, what can seem like a setback actually created a real opportunity for me. As a lawyer, I represented 4 citizens who appealed that revised plan, and I never could have done that had I been on the Planning Commission still. Because I knew quite a lot about that plan, as did some of my clients, including former County Planning Director David Stahlheim, we were able to raise some important issues that otherwise wouldn't have been raised. And clearly our concerns had merit, as that January 9th decision shows, when it concluded that part of the county's comprehensive plan is invalid and illegal. And we are looking forward to working with the county to try and make sure that finally we will get that comprehensive plan to comply with the Growth Management Act. Thank you.
Jay?
Okay. Is that on? I didn't bring a statement, but I'm Jay Irwin. I'm a private land use consultant here in the county. Do most of my work in rural areas, some in some small projects in cities. Went to Western 20-ish years ago, just as actually the Growth Management Act was being enacted. So we were seeing it on the chalkboard and paying attention back in the day as everything was being contemplated. Kind of lived the Bellingham dream here for a few years, being an educated skier and snowboarder. And ended up going to work for Whatcom County in the late 90s in the current planning, in the planning department, reviewing mostly small land use applications, short plats, lot line adjustments, and building permits, zoning approvals. But yeah, was definitely around, at the end of the very kicking and, well, I guess it's always been kicking and screaming, but the end of the 90s when there was definitely a more definite resistance to the GMA at that point. So I think the dust was starting to settle at that point, and of course the GMA evolves, and as decisions are made, and of course the whole rural element was pushed off for many years, and of course with Lake Whatcom issues in the early 2000s and all the way through, and still, I was out at the planning department until 2006 when there was a lot of change going on at all times, state and locally, and since have been a private consultant since 2006, still keeping with, working with smaller projects in mostly the rural area, and have been working with some clients affected by the rural element update, and I guess I see the tail end of things as everything trickles down to the local level and how individual property owners, again particularly rural property owners, are affected by the GMA.
Gary?
Thanks. Everybody hear me okay? I have a loud voice so people usually can hear me. So I'm just a small-town Ferndale guy that decided to enter politics because he liked his town and wanted to do good things. Not a lawyer, not an expert on the GMA, so I guess I'm the uneducated guy up here, but maybe I represent the common person that most of us are. Ferndale's a growing community. One person mentioned that's true. We're still building a lot of homes. We built more homes in Ferndale last year than any other city. More new home starts. We've had a lot of new commercial development. We have interest in more commercial development coming. We're working with the Lummi Nation for large parts of Slater that will kind of change some of your ideas. If they go fee-for-trust land, rules completely change because now it's a separate nation. So Gene and I probably have some disagreements on how the Growth Management Act was implemented. The Growth Management Act does talk about local control. We always had some arguments on how we had local control. In Ferndale, we had more citizens attend our hearings and tell us what they wanted Ferndale to grow to and what they wanted to happen. We had more meetings in Ferndale with more people attending than Whatcom County did. And so we thought we heard from our citizens, thought where we wanted to go. We agreed that our UGA was too big. We wanted a 42% reduction in our UGA. Whatcom County wanted a 55% reduction. The Whatcom County Council that's in office now agreed with us and said, okay, we understand your local control. We understand your arguments. We agree with you 42%. We were sued by private citizens to try to go back to the 55%, mainly on some of our capital facilities plans. Tough for a small city to plan. You're correct. We never have enough funds. My planning department consists of a not-so-distant, pretty recent graduate of Western Washington and one assistant planner. That's my planning department, 2 people. But we banded together. We do have our capital facilities plans. So we think that Ferndale is growing appropriately. We think that we're going in the right direction. We have raw land that is ready for development. We have a freeway running through our town. If people don't understand, people want to buy there, people want to develop it because people drive by on that freeway. And so, yeah, we do have some disagreements. I'm sure some people will have some different opinions, but we think Ferndale's growing in the appropriate way. I do have one thing that's just a big part of me that I want to focus on is that I don't think the problem here is with the cities. We've always disagreed in terms of our UGA is that what happens in an area that someone has given us to grow into, all bets are off. In Whatcom County, there's no impact fees. So then people want to come in and annex into a city, and they go, we'd like you annexed in because we want your facilities, we want your municipal sewer, we want your water. And, oh, by the way, as soon as you do it, we want proper roads, we want this, we want that, we want everything, we want sidewalks. And just today, it was fun, my phone call just before we came here. Mr. Mayor, why is there snow still on my sidewalk? You know. Then the second phone call was, Mr. Mayor, why don't I have a sidewalk? So I don't think the problem is with the cities. We're trying to plan properly. Density is a great thing as long as it's right not next to you. Not everyone wants it. Boy, embedded in our American DNA is everybody wants that nice home, a yard, maybe some land to grow a chicken. That's our big issue now. And so I think we sometimes forget that's, you know, my generation came to America from Norway because they wanted some land. They wanted the American dream of a house and a place to live in. And so we can never forget that. And some of our disagreements go back and forth. County people, I'll say this, and now you're going to get mad at me. County people get sensitive when they feel that people from another city are trying to tell them how to live their lives. They're very sensitive about that. And so I'm sure we'll discuss that.
Thank you. So what I'd like to do, I have about 4 probing questions here, and I'll change the order in which I have you answer them. Try and keep us on time. And some of you may have touched this a little bit, but why don't you focus in on them? From your particular area of expertise, what do you see as the benefits and challenges of the Growth Management Act? Jay, why don't I start with you, then Jean, then Gary.
Benefits and challenges. Benefits being, I think overall it protects the area that we live. I mean, we all come here for a reason, right? It's a very beautiful and naturally attractive place. And I think a lot of people come here from other places where it's not so beautiful. We all know that. So if you look at, at the time of the passage of the Growth Management Act, how many other states, I think there were just 2 or 3, maybe Oregon and Hawaii, that had such statewide growth mandates. So I guess as difficult as it is and complex as it is and changing as it is, or the implementation of it, how it reflects regulations on the ground, it's a benefit to all of us to have it in place because it does. I think we don't want to become another LA or a Linwood, whatever. And I think with the framework of the Growth Management Act, I think we're ironing out the specifics, topic by topic. But from a overall statewide planning standpoint, I think it's beneficial to have it. Urban growth area, the terms that we talk about and that are contemplated as goals in the Growth Management Act, urban growth, protection of agriculture, protection of the environment, designation of resource lands. It's like, it's kind of a forward-thinking piece of legislation to line by line go through and say, we're going to prioritize these things. The devil's in the details, which I guess brings us to the challenges. I think since I work with mostly mom and pop property owners, some greedy evil developers, but no, some professional developers I work with, but mostly these days it's mostly mom and pop, and being a professional myself, I mean the challenge I think with it is the complexity, and it seems to get more and more so, but a lot of times you see rural property owners scratching their heads like, where does all this come from? Where, you get asked that question a lot. Where do all these rules come from? How where you look at whether it's density, whether it's water, whether it's critical areas, whatever the issue may be. There's usually a whole stack of things that go along with okay, how, if somebody wants to build a house or, a shed or something, or subdivide their land, boy, it's pretty mind-boggling. A lot of times people ask me that question, or, that if they want to split off a lot or something like that. I said, you sure you want to do it? It's going to be it's going to be a tricky one. But I guess going back to GMA, the complexity, and then I guess tying in with that is how dynamic and how, I guess, unpredictable it can be. And I'm hoping that maybe we're just seeing the height of that now in this rural. I don't know how familiar with everybody is, with the rural element argument that's going on these days. And it, like Gene said, it is, I think, kind of the last. I'm not sure if it was done intentionally or not when they wrote the GMA, but that was kind of like the least specific of the element, was the rural element. And so, and with the political swings that have gone on the county council and the planning commission, it is really tough if you're a property owner in Whatcom County right now. But I'm hoping that that's just kind of the sign of the times right now. We can get everything resolved and have some predictability, because that certainly is a challenge right now.
Jean, I was given a note that says we're tight on time, so I'm going to, if I stand up, it means you're at the end of your
Okay, great. Benefit is, as we've seen in the national real estate meltdown, the places that are doing well are urban areas with good services that are dense and walkable. And we're seeing that agricultural land has significant economic value in Whatcom County and across the country. So I think the basic idea of the Growth Management Act has been proven out by time, that what you want to do are have urban, dense, walkable areas and agricultural areas. Mayor Jensen said everyone wants a house with land, and I think many people do want a house with land. But what we're seeing in terms of evidence and demographics is that young people and old people now are wanting to live in denser urban areas. And so the concepts behind the Growth Management Act, I think, have been proven out with time. I think the biggest challenge is the way the law is set up, because it puts the county in charge of planning in a way that requires the county almost to put itself out of business. The county is supposed to limit and control growth in its area, which is incredibly hard to do politically. What we need, and what we haven't had in this county, is better coordination between and among the county and the cities, I think. And the fact that we don't have that has led to polarization, and that's been our biggest challenge in Whatcom County, till it reaches the point where people like me, look, I'm a developer's attorney. I represent house builders, road builders. I am not a wild-eyed green person, but nothing that my clients and I said to the county council was taken into account at all. Every argument we made was made before the county council. We were completely excluded from any consideration. That level of polarization has to go away, and for this to work, we have to make sure that we have a way for that polarization to be, if not eliminated, at least diminished.
Gary?
Thanks. The greatest thing to remember, I think the Growth Management Act is a great thing. The key here is it's a Growth Management Act. It's not a Growth Stoppage Act. So they want us to manage the growth. And you hit on something that's really important, is that I think everyone wants to get an answer quickly. And so in Ferndale, we're going to have an annexation blueprint. And so we're going to map out, and I want to stop for a second, I want to recognize that a smart supervisor hires people that are way smarter than him. And so my planner, Yori Burnett, and my information director, Sam Taylor, way smarter than me. So great thing. And remember Yori's name, because he's one of the most brilliant planners in Whatcom County, and we're proud to have him. And the idea is, coming from Yori, is an annexation blueprint, that now we know that our UGA is shrunk. We ought to have a plan that we can tell every landowner, this is when we think we're going to annex you. This is when we think we're going to progress, so you can plan for that and not be upset. The worst thing, people want to know the answer of what they're doing in the land. That's where those yellow shirts came from. Is like, well, we were told that we were in the UGA and we planned for this, and I'm going to do this land to my grandchildren, and that didn't happen. And that upsets people. So you are entirely correct. The Growth Management Act forces us to plan ahead, and that's what we should do. We're going to have some disagreement on how that growth plans ahead, but it is a Growth Management Act, not a Stop Growth Act.
So, given the pros and cons that you just laid out, how does Whatcom County get to a shared vision? What are the steps that need to happen? And I'll start with you, Gary.
This one is, we started this where we tried this. It was called the Growth Management Coordinating Council. All the mayors, all the people in Whatcom County, Pete Kremen started it because Ferndale wasn't out of compliance. We were okay. Whatcom County was. So Pete got us together. We had a series of meetings, and we all came with a direction, voted on a direction, not agreed to by the Planning Commission. And that was a different direction. That's okay. But that's still a legitimate start, is that planners getting together in the same room and talking planning geek speak. Yori likes it. And coordinating an effort. That's a big effort. I've talked about it before, is that in our UGA, we should be doing the permits through Ferndale, because that someday we're going to grow into that. We've set our UGA. That's not going to change for quite a while. So when you want to build something that's in our UGA, it would really be beneficial that you built to Ferndale standards, started paying impact fees, and did it. Unpopular decision with some developers, sorry. But if that's going to be someday in Ferndale, then let's do those improvements now. Let Ferndale plan their future, because it is our future. And it certainly would help Whatcom County. We have to recognize the fact that Whatcom County's planning staff is devastated with lower numbers, as is Ferndale. So, hey, we'll take it on. We're willing to take it on.
Jay, how does Whatcom County get to a shared vision?
Sorry, questions like these aren't really my forte. Shared vision. Some of the points I think that Gary made is that it is growth management. That the numbers that you cited at the beginning of the presentation of how many people are coming here. I guess having some faith in the Growth Management Act, that it is, a working document. It's an evolving piece of legislation, and that it's not. I guess it's the question between the jurisdictions, a shared vision, or are we talking about the citizens of the county? I'm thinking about just the people, in that that it is it's a work in progress. It's a long-range document. The rural element is under the microscope right now. And for just with some of the things that Gary mentioned, maybe perceived lack of notification, or I do get that a lot. When you're dealing with people that live in the rural and the agricultural areas, they really don't take kindly to that sort of thing. Changes without their notification. So accepting that it's a work in progress.
Jean?
Well, I think first step is to recognize that we do have a shared vision. Before we started working on our planning matters in 2009, the planning department had done a lot of work with the public in visioning. And what we found was that the public had a vision that was very similar to the Growth Management Act's vision. Didn't want sprawl, wanted agricultural land preserved, wanted to make sure that our water was clean. So the first thing we need to do is work with the public. When the county council redid the planning commission's recommendation, it didn't go to the public. It never took its proposal to the public and said, what do you think about this, before it did its year and a half of work and came out with this proposal. So if we're going to come to a shared vision, we need to talk to the public. That's part of it, and we've done that. We have to recognize in Whatcom County, at some point, I think we have to recognize that part of the shared vision is state law. We are part of the state. We can't keep saying we hate the Growth Management Act. We're going to fight against it. It's wrong. The Growth Management Hearings Board are appointed. We don't have to listen to them, because part of our shared vision has to be that we are part of the state. I think that in terms of planning for rural areas, I would go back to what I said. We can't demonize some people and keep them out of the discussions. I think we need good ideas from everyone, and I'm hoping that the county will work with those of us who were challenging it in order to come up with a compliant and vision that does appeal to the people of Whatcom County. Finally, I hope we do get what happened there? A functional growth management coordinating council. The last one it was sort of an odd body because the city of Bellingham, with 40-something% of the population of the county, only had one vote, much like the city of Nooksack. And it was sort of which in other counties is not the case. In other counties, there's weighted voting. I think we need to think about that. I didn't attend any of those meetings, but I was at the meeting where the Growth Management Coordinating Council voted against Whatcom County's goal of 100,000 acres of preserved agriculture. So I think we need to make sure that the Growth Management Coordinating Council, as well as the planning bodies, the official elected bodies that work on these decisions, are taking into account the vision of the people, which we find out by talking to them.
So now we're kind of running out of time, so I'm going to open to some questions. Do you want me to take them, or do you want to field them?
We're going to open this up to the audience now, and as is customary, we let our members ask questions first. Chuck is over there with one mic, and Don is over there with another. Don, do you have somebody? Did you raise your hand? Okay, right here. Do you have somebody over there with a badge, Chuck?
I do, right here. Please run.
Curious. Since doing work in various jurisdictions, for instance, Cedar Woolley, the preamble to their zoning code says to be compliant with growth management, this city is required to have minimum densities of 4 and 5 units per acre. My question is, since FutureWise is challenging Whatcom County and the city of Bellingham is challenging Whatcom County, how does the city of Bellingham escape challenges while maintaining 2 per acre zoning in several areas of the city?
Would you identify yourself and say who your question is for?
Ron Jepson, probably Gene would be the most appropriate, I guess.
Well, I am not sure quite what challenge you want. Are you asking why no one is challenging the plan right now? Because under the Growth Management Act, you can only challenge enactments at certain times. And I'm not aware that the city has adopted any kind of planning measure that would be subject to challenge right now. I think generally we are in favor of increased density in the cities, and Bellingham's working on that. You know, as everyone knows, there are challenges to density. Mayor Jensen mentioned everybody likes density when it's not next to them, but I know in downtown the city's making strides. I know that there are efforts to increase density, and if you look at densities in the city, David Stahlheim's put together, it's on our blog, Get Whatcom Planning, has put together a map that shows how densities have changed in Whatcom County over the years, and density have gone up significantly in the city of Bellingham. It's not happening instantly, but it's beginning to happen. So I don't think there's anything going on right now for anyone to challenge. Generally speaking, increased densities are a good thing.
Hi, John Lasso, Point Roberts. I'd like to ask all three of your position on impact fees. You mentioned it, Mayor Jensen, and their relation to compliance with the Growth Management Act.
So me first?
Yes, you.
So you're asked, is your question is if I agree with impact
Do you
fees?
support impact fees?
Correct. We do in Ferndale. Just went through a heck of a long battle in terms of increase our traffic impact fees. But I'll talk a little bit on your density thing, because let's go back. Density is created by the developer who builds density. So that person that has that lot has to have an incentive to increase and go up. In Ferndale, we tried it where we lowered our impact fees in our downtown core because we wanted to have people go. Still hasn't penciled out. So here's the dilemma. Is the developers come and say, Gary, we may think there's density in Ferndale, but we got to build a cheaper unit, so you really should reduce the impact fees in downtown, and maybe it can pencil out where we're going to go, because the developer does it. So it's like, okay, we want density downtown, we lower the impact fees, but that impact has to go someplace else. Tough question. Impact fees, no developer likes them. Sorry, Ron, true. But cities use that money. We don't have enough money now. I mean, we have a road you're driving 10 miles an hour on because we don't have enough money to fix our roads. So it's a tough question. I want to see density, but I don't, they want to make it pencil out. So that's a tough one. Developers create density because they have to develop their lot and go above their store. Right now, we gave them incentives. They think there's more. We'd like them to build above store, but it doesn't pencil out yet. That's a tough issue.
Well, John, I think you know the answer to that question from me, because when John and I were on the Planning Commission in 2008, we actually, the county had hired a consultant, and the consultant looked at all of the development that was slated to occur in the county and looked at all of the transportation facilities required for that, and based on that, came up with an impact fee. That impact fee, if I recall properly, was going to be roughly 17% of the cost of the facilities caused by additional growth. And the Planning Commission did recommend the adoption of that impact fee. It never went anywhere. It just sat there. Whatcom County has no impact fees. This, of course, creates a tremendous incentive to develop outside of urban areas. So the city of Bellingham has impact fees. It takes all the traffic from folks that are driving in and has to pay for its own roads, but the folks out in the county aren't paying for impact fees. And that's the opposite of what the Growth Management Act is hoping to achieve. Rather than adopting measures to contain and control rural growth, the county has failed to adopt measures that would at least create an even playing field. And so I think that some sort of reasonable impact fee that puts the rural areas and unincorporated areas more in the same position as folks that are building in cities would be a good thing.
Jay, do you have a position from working in the planning department in the county if impact fees have been considered?
The county's talked about it for years, yeah. And I don't think developers, I guess I don't know, they probably don't jump for joy over impact fees, but I think as long as, there's a public process and they're justified, and a lot of what you see and what I've heard in the city where the impact fees are, as long as there's consistency, as long as the fee is for an impact. You hear things of remodels or rebuilding a house, or there's all these asterisks when you're dealing with land, and maybe if it's more clearly spelled out as to when the impact fee is appropriate, if it's truly addressing an impact, if it's reasonable and predictable. Like I said, developers aren't going to jump for joy, but there'll be less resistance.
Thank you. I think Chuck has one over here.
Hi. For years, I think the county has been producing plans that are not compliant with the Growth Management Act. They're challenged in court, and the county continually loses those challenges. I wonder if anyone has an estimate of the amount of money that has been spent defending plans that the county had to have known were not compliant when they passed them, and what is the solution to stop spending that money needlessly? Thank you.
And your question is for? That was Barbara Ryan, I'll tell you.
Oh, anyone?
I'll take it.
All right, Jet.
I don't know. It'd be nice to publish that. It would also be nice to know, I would really love to see someone publish that total, and I'd like to have the total published, who funded, because City of Ferndale got sued. Let's be public. Let's be completely public across the line. Let's say who funded yours, how much money did you spend, and how much did the county spend. I can tell you City of Ferndale spent $40,000 defending our case. So that's I know. I don't know about the county. Love to hear the other side, who funded everyone else.
Well, I can speak to that. come to think of it. I challenged Whatcom County as an attorney representing clients, and it was a pro bono matter. So I paid for it with probably thousands of hours of time, and my clients paid for it, bless their hearts, by paying for photocopying and other costs. So that's who funded that particular action. I just did an estimate of what it might have cost Whatcom County for its rural element that was just invalidated and found illegal. And my back of the envelope estimate was $250,000. And that was looking at the county hired an attorney outside of the prosecuting attorney's office. We know what that cost. That was $40,000. I estimated about $60,000 of the prosecuting attorney's time. And looking at staff time, it was at least one full-time person for 2 years, and I used a lowball figure for that, and it comes up to about $250,000. Now, Whatcom County has a very depleted planning staff, and it's got some big matters coming up. It's got North America's largest coal port to be thinking about. It's going to be processing those permits. It's got a jail to work on. It's got asbestos flowing through Swift Creek into the Sumas River. Whatcom County has plenty of issues to deal with, and this use of planning staff and council time, we need to think, is that our priority? Is that where we want our tax dollars to go and our council time to go? And hopefully this time we'll move forward and work together and get through this as opposed to just keep doing it all over again.
Over here.
Hi. My name is Bill O'Neill. I'm presently unemployed. My question has to do with teeth in the Growth Management Act, because it was mentioned at the very beginning that there's need for teeth in the Growth Management Act. My question is, what are some examples of those that exist or should, and has anyone been bitten?
Sure. Yeah. We got bit. $40,000 is a pretty big bite for a city my size. We're compliant now. We argued during the process. The Whatcom County Council first agreed with it. Said, yeah, we're going to finish our comprehensive plan. We're going to finish our capital facilities plan. We're in time, so we learned that lesson. The interesting one is Fire Department, Fire District 7. We have no control over Fire District 7. They're a separate entity. They said, we don't have a capital facilities plan. We're not going to do it. We don't have to do it, and you can't make us. So City of Ferndale spent time. We did the capital facilities plan for them with help from Warner Webb from Whatcom County. So that's the teeth, is that we learned a lesson there. I'll admit that. Okay, we'll have our capital facilities plan planned out. Annexation blueprint will tell us that. Well, at least we'll know be able to plan ahead. Like I said, it's a great thing for planning. It always upsets me that we have to go to court, though. It upset me that local citizens decided to sue us, and we had to spend money going it. What is it? I don't know. Some attorney might tell me it's 95% of the cases in Whatcom County never make it to court because people sit down at a table and talk and work things out. And I wish we could do more of that because, like I said, Gene's right on that. We completely agree that we ought to sit down and talk more and figure it out before we spend money on lawyers or your time or something, because it's not the best use of my city's money.
Just expanding on that, I just think it was inevitable. I mean, in the rural, what were there, 39 landlords? It was such a vast area, and the consequences of, depending on where each one of us thinks, is a plan that's going to be compliant with GMA. And of course, those things vary quite tremendously. There's just so much at stake for rural property owners and investors. I just didn't see people sitting down and singing Kumbaya and ironing it out. I think it's doing what it has to do, unfortunately.
Well, I think in addition to Kumbaya, we need some leadership. I mean, we need the county council level and the county executive level to hear some leadership saying we've got to go through that. In terms of teeth, there are two things that can happen. Ordinarily, if there's an order from the Growth Management Hearings Board, just keeps going with its usual plan, the Hearings Board can impose invalidity, and that is an extraordinary remedy that tells the county it can't process permits anymore. Whatcom County's had 3 invalidity orders in the past 13 months. The other possible bit of enforcement is sanctions from the governor, and of course that's so extreme that it's very difficult to do politically. But we're under an invalidity order now. Hopefully that will be an incentive for some leadership, and we will sit down and work out some of these issues.
I think we have one more over here.
I've been hearing about what the county does and what the Planning Commission does and what the state does in the Growth Management Act, but the title of this speech was supposed to be, who does the land belong to anyway? And I'm one of the people that some of the land belongs to, and out in the rural area, and I was wondering who are the people that decide what land is rural and what land is rural 5 and what is supposed to be left for expansion arbitrarily. How can we deal with this? There are people who've been out there way before. Most of the people in the county, I would say, have been out there long before you had any Growth Management Act.
I guess the short answer is the county council decides that. I think it's another topic is, we inherited in 1990, it wasn't GMA compliant. I mean, the map, the cards we were given in 1990, we are dealing with a lot of that. So vesting is another issue, and non-conforming uses are a big part of that. Pre-existing uses and zoning that, I know planners, it started in the early 70s, and it's an evolving thing. So yes, there's a lot out there that doesn't make a lot of sense, and I know from a rural perspective, a lot of what we're talking about, especially recently, sometimes it's counterintuitive. It's why is there so many rules being made? But ultimately, the county council makes those decisions.
But clearly, Gene and everyone's right, the Growth Management Act, it's clearly better for all of society if more people live in the cities, near the schools, can walk if they can. Clearly that's a better situation. And so I think the Growth Management Act wanted us to move towards clearly defined UGA boundaries that said, these are the cities and this is the county. And I think we're moving towards that. What you've asked for is, though, you need to have a blueprint that shows where in the future. Are you in a UGA? When is it going to be annexed? What are you going to do? So you can plan for that. And that hasn't happened. Ferndale's UGA used to go all the way to the ocean and touch Blaine. It was enormous. And we will agree that that's too big. And we were never going to, the city would never grow that big in a million years. It would never be all that way. So I think we're moving there. But it is frustrating. I think I'm hearing you say that it's your land and you want to decide what you want to do to it. To a certain point, I don't want you to put a nuclear power plant right on it.
Well, I think the comment raises the issue, which is absolutely true, is that land's an emotional commodity. It's an economic commodity, but it's also an emotional commodity, and that is what makes it so difficult, because we do feel like autonomy on our property. One of the great things about property is that we feel like it's a space where we can do what we want. And I think that argues very strongly for saying, let's get through this. Let's stop boundaries go in and out. Let's be stewards. I got the wonky mic. Let's be stewards for the future, and let's make sure that we're doing that in a way that provides some certainty to property owners. And I think that's absolutely right.
Thank you. Good questions. I hope you'll join me in thanking all of our panel members and our moderator today. As is our usual thing at City Club, we give out a little thank you in the form of this lovely book, which we have for each of them. Our next program is February the 22nd. It will be Treating Mental Illness, Social or Just Good Business. We have such interesting titles, don't we? I hope everybody's taking home their papers. Study hard. The test is next February. Thank you.